Hello and welcome to another episode of Smokey and the One-Armed Bandit. In today's episode, it's all about the electrical on the car. We've got engine looms to make, computers to program, and body looms to thin out. So first things first, let's jump down to the bench and take a look at the parts that I've accrued for this job. So here's the pile of parts that I've been accruing for a little while now. I know what people are going to say. They're going to tell me that there's nothing wrong with using the standard GM computer and a tablet, and in most ways you're probably right, but there are a few key factors that made me go this way rather than travelling down that road. A couple of things for that is I find the tablets to be a bit janky and a bit slow, and I want everything in proper real time via CAN, and LS1 is the only LS that doesn't have a CAN OBD2, unfortunately. The other thing is the GM computer doesn't really track a whole bunch of other parameters that I want to know. In particular, things like fuel pressure, oil temp, fuel level, which is, it does kind of track, but not in a way that's going to work with the BMW fuel tank and sender units. This thing will do it all, including drive-by-wire, not that we're actually using it, but it's good to have that facility for the future if I want to. So this is a Link Extreme G4X, which is the most recent sort of version of the Link, and that should be good to run the LS all day with no issues, and a whole bunch of other bits and pieces. Then I got this CAN Lambda from Link, which will tell us the air-fuel ratio, make sure that everything's sweet. There's a couple of other boxes here for connectors. Then over here is my digital dash. So this is from PowerTune Digital, an Australian company. It's actually significantly cheaper than all the competitors out there. Looks to be a pretty solid unit from what I've seen thus far, not that I've used it too much. But I think it was about, I think they range from $650 to $800. That's what I bought. I also got this loom, which is a manual LS1 loom, which I've stripped and labelled. So I got a little bored of the Excel stuff on the computer. Decided I wanted to come and actually do something. So what I'm going to do is start cutting off all of the plugs on the loom that I don't need, and then feeding those wires back through to the plug at the front here, and then cutting it off. So the MAF, we're not going to need that. We are going to be using the map sensor, which is over here. It's pretty standard for LS to get rid of the MAF sensor, MAFless tune and that sort of thing. So we're going to do the same thing. We'll get this to bite the dust. See you later. So some of you might be wondering why I'm cutting up an old loom rather than making a new one. Reason for that's pretty simple. This loom cost me about $250. If I had to go out and buy the wire, which is obviously special wire so you don't make all of them the same color, and then go and buy all of the connectors for all of the plugs on the LS, it's going to cost me a lot more than $250. I think even just the Link pre-pinned connectors with all the wire would probably run me more than $250, and I'd still have to get all of these and crimp them up. The second reason is all of this is the correct length. I don't have to go and measure it out, make sure that I get the right lengths. And the third reason is all of these connectors are done OEM spec, so I know that they're going to work. I don't have to worry too much about them. Don't have to worry about them pulling out. All I have to do is worry about making sure that all of these connections are correct. And obviously I do have to add in my own bits and pieces like fuel pressure and oil temp, but I was going to have to do that anyway, so I'll add them in. And yeah, that's the reason I'm going with this loom. It's a lot easier to cut things out and buy second hand than it is trying to buy new and make your own. So I have no idea how much of this I'm actually going to use because wiring's pretty boring at the best of times, but it's fun talking to myself, so I'm just going to keep on doing it. So last night off camera I ended up going through the loom. There was a couple of wires, I wasn't sure of what they did, so traced it through and figured it all out. So this loom is probably about as thin as it's going to get now. And all I have to do really is cap off a couple of earths, which are still hanging around the place. I need to get the right size heat shrink for that. I did also figure out what these 12 volt supplies are for. This is for the T56's reverse lockout solenoid to stop you going into reverse when you're trying to get sixed. And then we've got 2 injector power supplies, 1 for each bank. Otherwise though, this thing is pretty much good to go. What I need to do up this end is start cutting off these wires off these GM connectors, crimping them and putting them in the plug as per what I figured out on the Excel spreadsheet. So well, I've been smashing out a lot of work on the engine loom and we've made pretty good progress. I think it's not too far away and we'll be able to use that loom to fire up the car. I actually haven't done much work on engine looms before, so I didn't actually know a lot going into it. So a lot of research later and I think we've done a pretty good job. Well, obviously the true test for that will be when I actually connect the link up and start testing everything. But for the moment, I need to jump into another space of the wiring, and that is this. So this is a body loom that's going to run a lot of the stock bits and pieces on the car, things like taillights, wipers and windows. This is obviously a very condensed version of the original E46 loom. So before we actually go and talk too much about this at the moment, I want to jump back to a year ago and show you guys what we first started with, and then I'll come tell you about what we've got now. Well, as you probably saw, there was quite a lot of wiring in the car that we didn't need. This was right about the era with the E46s that they started doing electric everything, so there was quite a lot of wiring to get rid of and plugs to get rid of. How I went from that loom to this loom was basically I plugged in all the plugs that I thought I would need for the functions that I wanted from the car and left all of the other ones unplugged. If a function wasn't working, I started plugging other things in until I figured out what it was. Eventually, I arrived at a point where everything that I needed worked, and there was quite a lot of plugs unplugged. So I went around and cut those plugs off, pulled the wiring from those out the loom, and basically now I've ended up with a loom that's got only the things that I want and not many of the things that I don't. So that's all pretty good. I am keeping a fair few features on this loom, which is why it isn't like a tiny little loom. I'm keeping things like the sunroof, the pop-outs, and the power windows. My theory there being that I'm probably not going to notice the weight too much, but I will notice being hot, particularly in South Australia, where some days it can be a 40+ degree day when you're drifting. So I want to keep the airflow to myself. I reckon that's going to affect me more than it is the weight. So I'm keeping them, plus they're kind of cool to have. Also keeping all the lights except for maybe the fog lights, because I'm going to need them anyway, but also this car is registerable at the moment, so if I want to go street sharking, I can. And also going to keep the wipers because I can't be a wet weather warrior if I can't see where I'm going. So those are most of the features I'm keeping. Oh, and also the boot release because it's already functional and I can't believe getting rid of it. So that's hanging around. Otherwise, there's not too much more to this loom. I've still got to take a few bits and pieces out of it. Things like interior lights that I didn't quite label or check when I was cutting the vast majority of the loom out. So got to pull them out. Then I can put it in the car. Over here is where the old fuse box used to be, so I've got a new fuse box to replace it, and that's going to be mounted up under the dash, which I think I might have showed you guys in the previous episode. So that's the loom, cut a bit more out of it, put it in the car, make sure all my lights and all of that jazz works properly. Well, like I said previously, we ended up cutting out the standard E46 fuse box. Reason being is I don't want to have to run two fuses. I really just want to run one central fuse box, and I couldn't do that if I kept the stock one, because I would have had to run that for the body loom and then run another one for everything else in the car. So ditched that idea and ended up buying this unit here. It's a Busman unit. It holds 40 mini fuses and 10 micro relays. Each of those are rated at 35 amps each. On the back, this is probably the best part of the fuse box. These two lugs here supply power to all of the fuses on the fuse box. That means that I don't have to run individual power to each of these fuses. I just put a big power on here and here. It goes along the bus, through the fuse, and then to the output wire into the loom. So I think that went pretty well. I think that should simplify things quite a lot, which I like. Still a couple of extra wires to figure out what I need to do with these, because I'm not 100% sure if I need them or what they actually do. But I'm going to chuck this in the car now and test this loom, make sure it all works, and figure out what these wires do. Well, putting the body loom in the car was a bit of a mission by myself, but it's all in there now. I've started testing it. Did run into a few issues when I was doing this. Originally, when I plugged it all in, nothing actually worked except for the headlights, which flashed at random times. What I ended up figuring out that was I hadn't connected 3 of the earths to the car. So I connected them up. Pretty much everything worked after that, except for the tail lights. I had a bit of an issue where nothing on the tail lights was working. No blinkers, no tail lights, and no brake lights. What I figured that actually was I'd put this bulb holder in this side, which had created some issues. The plugs still work and still go in, but the actual wiring to those plugs is different, which created a little bit of chaos for a little while, but I figured that one out after a couple of Facebook posts and probably about an hour. So now at the moment, the only thing that I can tell is not working is the boot release, which I think might have something to do with the immobilizer and the alarm system. I may have to just wire up that separately from the original point on the body module. And I think probably also having a bit of an issue with the right-hand side tail light, in that when I wiggle it, it turns on and off. So I might have a broken wire in there. But generally speaking, my wiring for the car seems to have worked. My theory must have worked to some degree, so pretty happy with that. The only problem I've got at the moment is the battery charger and jumper pack has run out of juice, so I'm going to keep myself occupied with a few other bits and pieces on the car. I need to make up some ground straps from the engine to the chassis, so I think I might do that. I've got all the equipment I need. Well, both the earth straps are on the car now. I think they came up pretty good. This one's pretty out the way, comes from the side of the block there, goes down to the factory earthing point on the sway bar mount. Then the other one on this side comes from this other ground and goes down there with a P-clip and then onto the back of the head. So all pretty neat, out the way and easy to get to the bolts, which is what I want in case I have to take this thing out in a hurry. Well, I figured out why my tail lights won't work. They're a bit, the battery's a bit dead at the moment, so having so many lights running is affecting it a bit, but they're working properly now. I have tail lights, blinkers, and brake lights. Whew, that was a pain in the ass. Turns out, see these 2 light control modules here? Yeah, they might look the same, but they are definitely not. They've got different part numbers. Turns out I've been using one from U-Pull-It, which I don't know what car it came from. I ended up going back to the original one, which I remembered I had in my stash somewhere, and everything works. So I'm not going to argue with it too much. I'm just going to go with it. I'm guessing different part numbers. Maybe one was a sedan and one was a coupe or something. I don't know, but I'm not going to argue with it. It's working. I'm happy. Well, I got a little distracted in the last couple of days. Didn't get around to doing too much filming, so I thought I might make up for that now. Show you guys what I've been up to. If we take a look in the back here, I've been fiddling around with the fuel level wiring. Basically, these tanks are a bit different than your average tank. They're actually a saddle style tank, so the drive shaft basically goes through the middle of it, and this means that the left hand and the right hand side of the tank can be quite different at different times. To combat that, they have 2 fuel level sensors, and they need to be wired in series. So I've done that. If we take a look in the passenger's side here and we ignore the mess of wiring I still need to clean up, you can see the link is nicely mounted in the corner here. It's quite close to where the loom's going to go through the firewall, and also very close to the fuse box there. So one central spot for the vast majority of the electrics I think is a good thing. Coming around to the other side, we have this firewall connector here for the main power, which is going to go to the starter motor, but also through a fuse to power the Astra pump for the power steering, and also to go down through a fuse to the alternator. So I like this sort of stuff. I don't like having things run through the firewall. I think something like that's a lot neater. It also makes it a lot easier if I need to take things out of the car. So that's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. I've also been running a whole bunch of random wires that I need to through the engine loom. Things like the start solenoid wire, the alternator exciter wire. I've also been messing around with Deutsch connectors, which I've got to say are really fantastic. For someone like myself with one hand, having something that's not as unwieldy as the standard open barrel splice is a lot better, and I'm quite a fan. So I've been doing that at the moment. I've got one plug done. Another one here, which is a higher amperage plug, is not far off being done. And these are all the wires that are going to go through into the body loom and also into the fuse box. Well, yesterday was a pretty big day. Between fitting stuff to the car, picking parts up and dropping panels off for paint, I ended up having a day that went from about 9 AM in the morning to 11 o'clock at night, but glad I did. We've made good progress. As you might be able to see, we've got no body loom in the car anymore. I pulled that out so that we can wrap it up for the final time. Looks so nice without a body loom. Why can't we have Bluetooth everything? Anyway, so I figured out the boot. Basically, the body control module thinks that the car should be locked, so it won't open the boot. So I found a way to wire around that. I'll be able to put a switch in the car. And then I basically went through this loom and figured out all the little bits and pieces that I needed to cover off on. There was quite a few wires that needed covering so they couldn't short, and a couple of different switches that I wanted to extend and move around. So that's done. I've conscripted Joe to help me wrap the loom today. I think he's just arrived and done a handbrake turn in my driveway. But yeah, time to wrap this up, put it in the car for the final time. Well, today's the last day of my holidays. I didn't quite achieve the starting the engine goal that I set out to do, but I've achieved pretty much everything else. If we come around here, we've actually got the loom all in the car after Joe helped me wrap it up yesterday. Big thanks to him. There's no way I would have been able to get this all done by myself, but it's all sitting in there. It's not looking too bad. But I did have a couple of issues. I think over there, under the driver's footwell, I've connected some wires that shouldn't be connected, and it doesn't seem to reach around, so I need to go take a look at that. Otherwise, though, I'm pretty happy with the progress that we've managed to achieve. I've still been waiting on the couple of parts for the radiator, or the radiator hoses, to get this thing fired up, so that's why we didn't really get that far, but it's pretty damn close. The wiring on the engine side of things is pretty much done. Well, another day, another bracket. Dad's been busy on this one while I've been at work during the week. Looks pretty damn good. This is obviously going to be the dash setup for the car. We've got the power tune digital dash in the center there. We've got some switches over here, which is going to be start and ignition at the top. The next one down is going to be the hazard switch. Over the other side, I've got a camera switch, and I'll have another switch there that's going to be for overriding the power steering. So I can turn the power steering on without actually starting the car if I have to push it. So that's what we're doing at the moment. I've got this mess of wires here that I need to plug into the back, and hopefully by the end of the day I'll have a dash set up and switches to turn everything on. So this is the intake pipe that we've been working on. We've got a 90-degree silicon joiner at the front, a 45-degree aluminium bend, and then this filter. This is actually, well, at least we think, going to be a temporary solution. We do want to run some kind of over the radiator setup for the intake so we can get cold air coming in from the front. But that was going to be a lot more work, and I kind of want to get the engine running, so I told Dad, let's just do a simple little pod filter setup, and we'll work on the over the radiator setup once we get the car dynoed and running. He can't really do temporary though, so naturally he's put this big old bracket in to hold it all in place. Goes across to the head there, so that is pretty damn sturdy. Also got the bung there for the IETs. We'll see what the air intake temps end up being, with the headers being reasonably close to the intake. Not super close, but close enough. and we'll sort of figure out what we do with the intake from there on. But I think for the minute this looks pretty good, should work reasonably good, and we'll monitor those IETs. So here's another bracket that Dad's whipped up. This one's again out of aluminium. He's getting better and better at it. It's for the main power isolator for the car. So basically you flick this switch and it turns off all the electrical to every item in the car. So that's going to go pretty much just behind where the gear shifter is going to be. It does have this kick out here. Basically what that is for is on race cars you need to be able to isolate the car electrically from outside the car. So generally what they do is they'll put a cable to the main isolator, and when it's pulled it flicks that switch, and it needs something to hold the sheath. So that's what that arm's for. So now to put it in the car, connect up the cables. Well, it's a Thursday, it's pouring rain outside, so much for a nice summer day, but I'm feeling pretty good. I've come up here midweek because I've got to the stage that I reckon we can pretty much fire Smokey up. I've been fiddling around with the Link ECU, getting my head around all that, and I think I've got the settings not great, but good enough to fire it up, maybe drive it on the trailer if I'm lucky. So fingers crossed, not these fingers, but other fingers that are holding the camera, that we get this thing fired up today and it all goes pretty smoothly. Let her rip.
Get ready to turn it off.
Yeah. Well, it runs. No. Well, that was a good mixture of exciting and nerve-wracking. She fired up first time, which is very surprising to me. I thought for sure I would have got something wrong that would have prohibited it from starting up, but started up straight away and ran for a little bit. Did have a little bit of a scare because the oil pressure was reading like 8 psi when it was running, which is obviously way lower than you want a running engine to have oil pressure. Did a bit of digging, figured out that I had the wrong calibration for it, so put the right calibration in there, and she's got about 50 to 60 of psi of oil pressure at idle, which is roughly what you want. So I reckon what we do now is we keep running her, get her up to temp, make sure that there's no issues, make sure that there's no wires or anything leading on the headers too. We don't want them to burn through, and go through all the gears, maybe make sure that the gearbox is half decent and there's no crunchy bits in there, and then yeah, I think it's nearly ready to go to the tuner, I guess, if it's running. I'll do a bit more fiddling in the ECU and yeah, probably send it off to the tuner. Alright, time to fire her up. Considering I set the idle to about 1000 RPM, that's not too bad. It's actually really close. Well, I'm pretty stoked. That was a pretty great evening. The car fired up and ran way better than I thought it ever would, considering I was the monkey that was making the base map. So yeah, really happy with that. Pretty happy with myself for managing to learn all that. I didn't put a lot of time and effort into learning it. I really didn't have a chance. So to learn what I did and get what I did out of it, yeah, pretty happy overall. The car's, it's obviously pretty rich. After we got it to about 80 degrees then, it pretty much smoked us out of the shed because it was so rich. So I'll let Carver worry about that when I handball it over to him to do the tuning. It's also running barely any ignition timing. I've got 5 degrees across the whole table because I just want to be really conservative and safe just for the startup. I have knock wired up to the ECU, but I haven't set it up because I really have no idea what I'm doing. So I'll leave that one and again, handball that one over to Carver. He can take it from there. Overall, car's running really good, no leaks, no issues. I think that's probably going to be the end of this episode. We've got a lot done, got all the electrical done on the car. We've got obviously the engine running now, and I think that's going to round us out. So I'll see you on the next episode of Smokey and the One-Armed Bandit, where we chuck this thing on the dyno and maybe even take it to the track. Okay, one of them has to be okay. Hopefully, maybe. We'll see. I think the fumes are still getting to me, if I'm honest. Oh, tripod. Okay. I can fix this.